Protestantism is without rival the largest religious force within the United States, with some 48% of the population identifying with the Church. However, Protestantism is fairly decentralized when compared with other religions and branches of Christianity, this stemming from the core ideal of Protestantism at its emergence that the individual has a personal relationship with God outside of the traditional hierarchy of the Church. Scripture alone in the hands of any reader held supremacy over any central church authority or sacred tradition, leaving matters not specified within Scripture up for interpretation, which in turn spawned various new ideals of how Christianity should be observed or practiced. The old traditions established by long-standing experience with doctrine and the interactions of the old Christian faith with the world around it over centuries were now reduced to only that which emerging Protestant branches identified as being wholly in line with Scripture, or rather their particular interpretation of it. This priesthood of all believers created a branch of Christendom which continually sprouted ever more branches, some of which have grown to become massive players in global culture, politics, and of course, spirituality. In the United States, the largest and undoubtedly one of the most historically significant denominations of Protestantism is the Baptist Church. The Baptists emerged gradually in part as a result of the Reformation, and more specifically its lack of success in England, where the newly established Anglican Church retained its firm hierarchy but now tailored it to the needs of the English monarchy. A sense emerged among many that 1. The Anglican Church was unclean and merely a perversion of Catholicism rather than a true reformation and restoration to original Christian doctrine, and 2. That the state should not hold so significant a grasp over the faith and of course over the lives of individual practitioners, this latter point being all the more central to the emergence of Baptist thought, as rather than attempt to reform the church from within as the Puritans had, these proto-Baptists broke away from the Anglican tradition and years later went on to develop the early Baptist church through their own biblical interpretation, though they did draw upon Puritan practices as well, as pioneers of the faith held Puritan or critical Anglican backgrounds. This new denomination would then make its way to the American colonies, first arriving in New England but truly finding its stride in these southern colonies following the First Great Awakening, as the abundance of common folk living off subsistence farms proved highly receptive to decentralized and relatively egalitarian Baptist doctrine, soon overwhelming and replacing the ruling Anglican minority who had held political power. Now before we go any further, let's take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Established Titles. Tell me, do you long for a title of distinguished character? Does Mr. or Mrs. just not quite cut it for you? Well, how about an upgrade to Lord or Lady? At Established Titles, you can acquire that title by purchasing a square foot of land in Scotland. The Scots have a custom of bestowing upon landowners the titles of Lord or Lady, so by purchasing a little parcel of land, you too can enjoy this honor and officially use these titles on credit cards, plane tickets, or wherever they may apply. Your purchase also goes toward a good cause, as Established Titles works with the One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future charities to match every purchase with the planting of a tree. Plus, you'll get one of these elegant-looking frame certificates and a unique code to locate your plot. Right now, Established Titles is offering a full 10% off every order when you go to establishedtitles.com/Monsieur and use promo code Monsieur at checkout. These frames are delightful gifts for family and friends, old and young alike, and remember, Mother's Day is right around the corner, so if you're looking for a last-minute gift, this here is sure to be a winner. Once again, that's establishedtitles.com/Monsieur and use promo code Monsieur at checkout to get 10% off your order. Now, back to the video. The Southern Baptists had, through a combination of the religious practices, historic skepticism of top-down authority, typical agrarian lifestyles, and commoner backgrounds, developed a uniquely populist fervor, one in which power was not centralized in a single religious leader or church, but decentralized among the masses and autonomous congregations who held firmly to common goals and beliefs laid out plainly in common scripture. Baptists essentially created for themselves a high in-group preference, a culture of self-sufficiency, and a tendency toward willing cooperation, all without a need for a central church. This adherence to written word over the commands of a leader, this independent willing cooperation and desire for decentralization would ultimately contribute to the ideals which helped motivate the American War for Independence, the Articles of Confederation, a separation of church and state, the Bill of Rights, and gave rise to the Democratic, Republican, and later Democrat parties, whose support base was largely driven by Southern agrarian Baptists. Baptists, of course, were not exclusive to the South, but it was there that they truly thrived as a movement and ultimately splintered off to create the Southern Baptist Convention when North-South divides reached a breaking point brought on by the moral issue of slavery, after which the Southern Baptist churches took up a greater degree of cooperation with one another, creating a more uniform Southern Baptist identity. Baptist populations in the North remained decentralized and waned over time, being supplanted by other churches as without a majority of like-minded individuals within a set community, Baptist values had little ability to be socially enforced given a lack of reliance on higher authority, Only in areas where the masses could cooperatively take a stand against an issue in large enough number did Baptist society and values have the ability to thrive, and as North-South divides grew, and the South became more confident of its distinct identity, that in-group preference rose, helping Southern Baptists to maintain dominance across the Southeast by discouraging or assimilating outsiders, as well as ostracizing those who violated the faith. The additional divides made clear by the Civil War helped to further define not merely a political party, geographic region, ethnic group, economic lifestyle, or spiritual belief, but an emerging civilization, one characterized as distinctly agrarian, Scotch-Irish, Southern, self-reliant, and Baptist. The post-war Reconstruction, which saw Northern will enforced upon the South through military force, saw Southerners stripped of political power, and actively sought to alter the Southern way of life, only served to reinforce the Southern sense of identity, as made clear by the emergence of the first Ku Klux Klan as a militant response to Northern influence in the South, the emergence of the Solid South as a decades-long voting bloc, and the enforcement of Jim Crow at the local level despite Northern efforts at establishing equality between the races. Southern blacks also largely belong to the Baptist faith, however have almost always carried a slight deviation from Baptist norms, in part derived from old African tradition. It was only following the abolition of slavery that Southern blacks were able to break away from Baptist churches supervised by white leaders and establish their own exclusively black Baptist churches, which would ultimately give rise to what is today known as the National Baptist Convention USA, with a membership whose racial composition is 99% black, and who stands parallel to the Southern Baptist Convention, whose membership stands at some 80+% white. Today, Southern Baptists remain largely concentrated within the southeastern states of the United States, stand as the largest Protestant denomination in the US, and the second largest single religious group in the country. Southern Baptists have also held true to their faith as originally defined, rather than conceding to cultural liberalization as some other Protestant denominations have for the sake of keeping religious doctrine palatable to modern tastes. Their numbers, however, are falling, with a declining population trend persisting for several years now, even in the face of an increasing number of physical Southern Baptist churches. It is without question that the Baptist faith has become intertwined with a particular demographic group, that being white Southerners, largely but not exclusively of Scotch-Irish background, who typically live in rural areas, and while outside converts certainly contribute to Baptist numbers, it has historically been since the South Baptist identity truly began to emerge that the majority of growth in the Southern Baptist Convention came from the raising of children in the South Baptist tradition. Today, everything appears to be going against Baptist growth. Birth rates among white Americans are at an all-time low, and though the southern states are not doing the worst at the national level, they are still well below the bare minimum 2.1 replacement fertility rate, meaning that as the older generation of Southern Baptists die off, there will be fewer younger Baptists to take their place. Urbanization and the emergence of the suburbs have reduced the number of Americans living in rural areas where Baptist practice once found a reliable and large support base. Religiosity trends in America are also favoring other groups, both in regard to immigration and in regard to culture, secularization being a massive hindrance to the growth of American Christianity across the board, and leading many among the younger generations to leave their churches in great number, or perhaps worse yet, discourage devotion among some who continue to identify with the church, giving many churches a false impression of how large their following truly is. This feeds into the fourth issue, which is that Baptist missionary work has declined, and the faith has seemingly gone on the defensive in the face of its population decline. Without serious efforts to grow their population, be it through increased natalism or missionary work to regain ground in urban and border areas, outside forces will begin to encroach on the Baptist South, diminishing the civilization's ability to enforce its order through its primary strength of social solidarity. In essence, it does not matter if the Southern Baptist Church ostracizes outsiders if those outsiders can establish a large enough support base for themselves. If you have enough outsiders coming to or arising from a traditionally Southern Baptist-controlled area, you will see rapid domination by groups who, unlike the Baptists, are very willing to use government power to enrich their own group at the expense of the Baptists, and politically enforce their own practices. In regard to secular groups, this might include legalization of abortion or promotion of LGBT ideas in public schools, things traditionally opposed by Southern Baptists but which they'd be unable to stop if they lost local government power to a more ideological and active population, even if such a population was merely a large minority of some 30%. Even other Christian groups like Catholics who are far more centralized would be able to displace Baptists if they were to arrive in traditionally Baptist areas in large number. Because of this, secularization and immigration, particularly from Catholic Latin American countries, stand as the biggest threats to the Baptist civilization. Rising racial tensions within the US might also create additional clashes between the majority white Southern Baptists and the National or Black Baptists, as their populations occupy many of the same states, and though the possibility of cooperation also exists, The tendency of some 90% of American blacks to support traditionally pro-secular and big government Democrat policy, in spite of nearly half of American blacks identifying as Baptist and a majority holding conservative social and religious views, suggests that racial and economic policy hold greater importance to black Baptists than observance of Baptist solidarity and historic rejection of top-down government power. And further, while the National Baptist Convention is also facing a population fall, it does not appear to be as significant as the fall of the Southern Baptist Convention. Additionally, more charismatic and spiritual movements such as Pentecostalism have begun gaining traction in the South, and given their decentralized nature have drawn in former Baptists into their ranks. Though that being said, the more decentralized nature of Pentecostalism might make it a source of future Baptist converts, given the dominance of Baptist culture in the South and the more organized nature of the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, despite all of this, it seems highly probable that the Baptist civilization of the southeastern United States will endure, even if it experiences a receding of its territory over the next several decades. The faith and greater Southern Baptist culture is deeply rooted in the region and stands as perhaps the most enduring large multi-state American subculture, despite bearing one of the most turbulent histories in the entire US. As we've already said, these are a people with a unique history, way of life, means of governing, and spiritual vigor, albeit one in need of revitalization in the wake of this depression it's currently facing. Southern Baptists as a church and as a culture will encounter significant challenges in the years ahead, which will determine whether they remain the dominant force in the Southeast or if they're reduced to a fraction of their former size, likely concentrated along the mountains of Appalachia. The Baptist civilization has long seen its political influence at the national level once the dominant force during the ages of Jefferson and Jackson reduced to a secondary influence, but that influence remained strong at the local level, and for the Baptists, that was enough. But now that local power will be challenged, and Baptist fervor will once again need to be reignited if it is to survive. As the United States experiences further turbulence and undergoes additional changes over the following century, the Southeast will be rocked by these difficulties and tested once again. In the event of an American collapse, it does not at all seem unlikely that Baptist America will emerge as its own polity. It, of course, would not be the first time such a thing occurred, nor would these states be without the agricultural, military, industrial, and logistical resources necessary to sustain and defend themselves from encroachment by rival powers, though once again their level of success depends heavily upon whether or not the Baptists rebound within the next decade or two, something which could easily occur as a response to increased government pressure, secularization taking on a more aggressive character, etc. Is Baptist America inevitable? Just about. Given the complexity of emerging religious movements and the shifting power dynamics within the US, there is a slight possibility that Baptist America is overwhelmed and subsumed by multiple groups at once within the century. However, in all likelihood, the Baptists, given their history and ethics, will rebound. The US of Z thanks you for watching. Support your legion by liking the video, or join our ranks by subscribing for more. Mr. Z,